Why is Trump exempt from their own alleged rules? Because he hurts who they hate. And for some people, hurting their enemies will override any of their professed principles. And I mean that everything about Trump is what many of his most ardent supporters once claimed to hate. He's Hollywood elite, complete with his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He's a big blue city billionaire who was a Democrat most of his life and was a part of their social circle. He's wildly insecure, weak, and easily offended. He's not a voice for the common man as they try to sell him. He has no idea what it's like to be a common man. Everything has always been done for him. The life of a giant toddler who doesn't know how to do even the most basic things like drive a car or shop for groceries. He cannot relate to you in any way. And not only was he credibly accused of sexual assault 26 times over 4 decades, but he was good friends with over a dozen high-profile pedos and sex offenders and has jumped through absurd hoops to obstruct, cover up, dismiss, and diminish the Epstein files. He released Ghislaine Maxwell to a minimum security prison where sex offenders aren't even allowed, and he even expressed interest in pardoning her. Other prisoners at that facility were transferred to harsher prisons just for speaking badly about her. Let me ask you, how many pedos and sex offenders are you good friends with? And when he came into power, he immediately abused that power, became wildly censorious, caused massive spending and deficits, warmongered, and dropped record-breaking numbers of bombs while claiming to create peace, and even shamelessly claiming that he deserved a Nobel Peace Prize right before sending in troops to attack Americans in cities he considers to be politically opposed to him. And he even openly admitted that it would be good practice for the military. Practice for what, exactly? He bombs civilian vessels, claiming that they're drug dealers, without showing a shred of evidence, as if that's even a crime worthy of being bombed in the first place. He politicizes federal duties that are meant to be neutral, thereby punishing the American people based upon who the majority voted for in a given area. For example, he's defunding energy infrastructure in blue areas to the tune of billions of dollars, which will drive up energy costs for Americans in those states, states that contribute the most money to the federal government. He denies disaster relief to blue areas, something he falsely accused Biden of doing to red areas, while proudly, openly doing it himself. He's sending in federal agents and red state National Guard to peaceful areas and deliberately stoking conflict, falsely claiming that they're war zones, all so that he can justify more authority. He wants to make blue areas worse places to live so that he can blame it on Democrat leadership. And remember that the man doing this was also a repeat draft dodger who renamed the Department of Defense to the Department of War and appointed a Secretary of War who was nothing more than a National Guardsman. Not to diminish the service people of the National Guard, but for one, a particularly young and inexperienced one, younger than I am, to publicly lecture our experienced wartime generals on the dangers of wokeness is absurd and quite ironic, considering he's perfectly unqualified and proven to be grossly incompetent, something they warned us that DEI would bring. But it wasn't DEI who brought us the unqualified and incompetent. It was Trump. choosing people out of loyalty, whether they'd bend the knee rather than if they were the best person for the job.
When the shadow grows taller than the man, one thing you need to know is that that is a false sun that is shining. Every single empire tells a story about itself. Rome told the world it brought civilization. Britain called its domination of continents the white man's burden. And America's heir to Europe's ideological project crafted the most magnificent myth. And this was the myth of the American empire. It stood as the world's shining example of freedom, democracy, and moral leadership. But this myth only shines because it burns the truth beneath it. In every corner where the American flag was planted, in every boardroom where Western corporations negotiated development, in every diplomatic corridor where Europe and US envoys whispered about stability and security, the same story repeated itself. What they called freedom was extraction. What they called democracy was manipulation. What they called stability was obedience, right? So this whole narrative, I now understand that you might know where it is pointing to. It is pointing to those kind of leaders who promote hypocrisy, while here they tell us that we need to be following human rights, this and that. You know, those kind of leaders. America is a perfect example. Look at Henry Kissinger. This man unalived so many people in the name of conquering and conquest, right? So yeah, it's so many examples we can give. So there's this white man who is calling out his very own government, the American government, for the atrocities they have committed against the humans, the black people, and other people around the world. So I want us to listen to him. I shall get back by the end of the video, of course, where we shall also have a deep critical analysis of this hypocrisy.
They claim to desire a meritocracy, but all they really care about is whether you're on their team. Trump has repeatedly committed blatant acts of election interference, has been rightfully charged with RICO violations during the 2020 election, and belongs in prison for doing so, which is exactly where he would have gone if he didn't become the president. He imposes secret police and mass surveillance. Where are you, right-wingers who were against the Patriot Act? And Trump is eliminating the presumption of innocence. Where are all you right-wingers who criticized the Me Too movement's "Believe All Women" slogan because you claimed to believe in the presumption of innocence? Innocent until proven guilty. Everyone deserves a day in court. Everyone deserves to face their accuser. Remember that? All that went right out the window. Now you cheer when ICE invades neighborhoods in Chicago and rounds people up in bulk without even bothering to find out who they are or what they've done, let alone ask for their papers. At least the Nazis asked for papers. We don't even do that anymore. Where are you now? You're proudly announcing that you voted for it. That's where you are. Sold your soul. Sold everything you claimed to be. And for what? And it's all done with the pretense of stopping crime, which is bullshit. You know, I lived in Chicago when it was at its most violent, which was during the early 90s. Crime today is far below what it was back then. And back then, deploying the military as some sort of solution wasn't even thinkable. Yet the crime managed to drop anyway, by more than 50%. That period is known as the Great Crime Drop. Look it up. And it didn't take the military to accomplish it. Now, people are more afraid of the government than of the gangs. Masked men are rounding up Americans and disappearing them, oftentimes based on race alone, but they'll attack anyone. They beat people in the streets for nothing. It's a gang. They're wearing masks and going after people for doxing them, as if that's even a thing for law enforcement. Their names should be right on their chests for all to see. We as Americans should not be programmed to blindly obey any anonymous person who demands it of us. Why do they even think they can get away with such blatant and illegal abuses of power? Well, because they were given explicit permission by the highest office in the land. So who the hell is going to prosecute them? Well, nobody right now, because Trump installed his loyalists. They don't even know how to do their own jobs. All they know how to do is be yes men, follow orders. That's not helping the country. That's endangering it. That's why these masked thugs invading our cities feel safe, zip-tying children in the street, beating random people, attacking anyone who exercises their right to film it, and now even gunning people down. That's why they're not afraid to commit blatant atrocities against Americans on American soil. Anyone who knowingly signs up for that is already the worst of the worst. We're taking people who belong in prison and we're putting them in uniform. And the result is that they are attacking innocent Americans and even children. And they're laughing about it. This is the side that claims to be for family values, by the way. But as I said, that was all a lie. People who still support this have no principles. They lied to you. They didn't want to drain the swamp. They wanted to be the swamp. They weren't outraged. They were jealous. Where are all you people who were against the pandemic overreach? What happened to you? Why aren't you speaking out against this? Where are all you smaller government people? Where are all you states' rights people? I'll tell you where they are. They're supporting it. Because during the pandemic, the policies were affecting them. And that's the only reason they were against it. They can only comprehend that which affects themselves. They're against empathy and will even explicitly say so. But now they believe that the government is only going after other people, illegals or leftists. And that's what they want. So they don't feel like this government overreach will affect them. So they support it. That's how myopic, selfish, and dumb these people are. And to the masked thugs, remember that when the Nazis were rounding people up, they didn't think they'd be held accountable either. They were in charge. They had ultimate authority over who got rounded up and who got killed. They too were untouchable lords. But that was a very brief moment in time. And just like them, you're not going to be in charge forever. And even though you may feel safe behind your mask, remember that there are still records of everything. You signed up for it using your own name. So just because it isn't known now, that doesn't mean it won't be known later. And so you may find yourself in a courtroom one day, which is a right you stripped from so many others. And if you don't like where they send you, remember where you sent so many others. Remember how you violated their rights. Remember how you terrified people and put them in limbo, put their entire lives on hold. Remember how you laughed about it. When the day comes in which you beg for mercy, ask yourself if those who show no mercy are more or less likely to receive any. But I know that this is falling on deaf ears. You have no principles. 47% of Republicans said that they would still vote for Trump, even if it was proved that Trump was directly involved with Epstein's trafficking of minors. Of the people who voted for Trump in 2024, that's 36 million of them. The law and order people, the anti-pedo people, the family values people. The people who smeared leftists as pedos and groomers just for supporting the LGBT community. The people who claim to care about closing the border because they say they worry about children being trafficked. But if their guy trafficked children or participated in their abuse, then it's okay because he's their guy. He has done more than enough to link himself to sex trafficking and abusing minors, but that doesn't even matter to these people, so there's really nothing you can say to them. Even if Trump were innocent, they already answered the hypothetical. If Trump is guilty, they'd still support him. They've already made the concession, so you can't use logic on them. They don't care about hypocrisy. You can't shame them. They care nothing about morality. How could they? How much worse does it get than sex trafficking children? Yet they're willing to overlook that. Now, maybe some of them questioned it for the length of the typical modern news cycle, but now they're all right back to their usual shameless cheerleading. You see, for them, morality only exists when they feel they've been wronged, but they don't give a damn when anyone else is wronged. For them, morality is just a chess piece that can be used to either attack or be sacrificed for their own benefit. Such people cannot be allowed to shape our society and our future. But that's exactly what they're trying to do right now. And the consequences of that are going to affect us for a very long time if we don't stop it by stripping them of leadership as soon as possible and then dramatically reducing the power of the executive branch, beginning with making it criminally accountable for its actions. Politicians need to start fearing the people again. I am sick and tired of it being the other way around. And if you think that we're not going to win MAGA over by speaking this way, then you're way behind the curve. At this late stage, the ones who were worth winning over have already been won over. As for the rest, you're not going to win them over at all, nor should you want to. They're exactly where they want to be forever and always. I'm not in the habit of capitulating to my opponent's demands on how I should win them over, especially this opponent, because for them, lying is like breathing. They pretend to shift their vote based on being called deplorables or Nazis. Yet when Trump does the same or worse, when he openly claims to hate more than half the country and says he wants them to suffer, his supporters see nothing wrong with it because they're shameless liars. So we shouldn't want to win them over. They should just be politically impotent. Permanently. Now, bear in mind that they remain an extreme minority, with all their gains achieved by manipulating a system that has been abused to the point of uselessness. They are unneeded. Those abuses of the system need to change. Literally every branch of the government needs to be overhauled at this point because our supposed checks and balances clearly aren't working. Congress has succumbed to corruption and pressure, and it's absurd that the traitor in the Oval Office has been able to install a third of the Supreme Court. This is our true national emergency. Your true self comes out when you are being tested, when you are tempted, when you're under pressure, when it becomes costly to stand by your principles. The decisions you make during those moments peel back the layers of camouflage in which you've cloaked yourself to tell others who you are, or even to tell yourself who you are. You think cheating is wrong, but when you're married and a person you find very attractive comes on to you, what do? You're against theft, but you found a wallet full of money and it has identification in it. What do? The people who still support Trump have chosen to go against their professed principles for what they believe will create an advantage for themselves, which is the same as cheating on their spouses or keeping the wallet. There's no more pretending. There's no more lying that they can do. We know they're lying now. All their camouflage is gone. They're naked now. The picture is crystal clear now. All good faith is gone. All trust is gone. No longer can they even pretend to care about pedos or government overreach or overspending or corruption or war, because they supported all of it explicitly. The devil made them an offer and they gladly took it. They can't then turn around and claim to oppose the devil. Oh, they'll clearly deny inconsistencies to your face, even when they're as clear as day, but you simply must reject their testimony now. It's done. It's over. There's nothing they can say. It's all lies now. Simply reject it all as the lies they are. Countless people have been negatively affected by this new political shift in power. They're using up their influence very quickly because people who are motivated by the politics of hurting others never expect their politics to hurt themselves. But that is exactly what always ends up happening. Unfortunately, such people are not usually bright enough to form predictive models in their head so that they realize what bad ideas they have. The only way for them to learn is through the actual negative experience itself. And sometimes they're still not bright enough to learn even then, especially not with all the shifting of blame and bogus scapegoats their masters give them in order to escape accountability. And now we're dealing with a scary escalation because of that failure of imagination. You see, things keep escalating, and we can't survive if we keep going in this direction. We're still on year 1 of this term. The murder of Charlie Kirk was used to justify a dramatic escalation. Now, I can understand thinking that the Kirk murder itself was an escalation, being a politically motivated murder. But it escalated to that point long before that, to the point of shooting and killing Democrat politicians and their families in Minnesota. But that was quickly and absurdly dismissed and shamelessly lied about. It was ignored by Trump and company. Any pageantry and flags at half-mast across the nation was out of the question. There wasn't talk of naming highways after them or putting their faces on money like there was for Kirk, which is absurd, and all fake reverence, by the way. He did nothing to warrant such worship, which is why it all rings so hollow. It's largely performative, as are most politics now. Charlie Kirk was treated very differently than the murdered Democrats because the different political sides capitalize on violence in very different ways. And also because, I believe, because Kirk's murder was caught on camera and was very brutal, which I think makes it more real for people who aren't his friends, family, or acquaintances. I did a recent video called the untold reality of political violence, that explains why the right and the left treat violence so differently, and why there is a huge misconception that the left is more violent, even though that's very much obviously not the case when you actually study all the data and incidents that have occurred over the last 40 or so years. When you look into it, you find that the overwhelming majority of political murders are committed by those who hold to right-wing ideology, specifically white supremacy, which is a lot more likely to become violent since so much of the ideology itself is rooted in fear. The right-wing politicians and influencers, however, desperately want you to buy into a complete inversion of reality. Their narrative needs there to be a violent leftist movement so that they can implement authoritarian policies based on political ideology, which is exactly what the Trump regime is currently trying to do. According to Trump's 7th National Security Presidential Memorandum, or NSPM 7, which gives law enforcement specific areas they are to focus upon. Those specific areas of focus are to investigate anyone who holds extreme views on migration, race, or gender, or anyone they deem anti-Christian or anti-capitalist or anti-traditional American values or anti-American as potential terrorists looking to overthrow the government. And of course, that will be construed as anyone who is anti-Trump, which is especially ironic, seeing as how Trump himself encouraged and then pardoned those who literally, physically, violently attacked the Capitol of the United States, and is now using the military to attack our own citizens. He himself should be investigated under his own memorandum. He's a blatant traitor and a man who is as far from Christ-like as anyone could possibly be. So it's all fake. They don't actually care. They have no real principles other than to do whatever it takes to acquire more power. And they will use whatever pretense they think aids in their acquisition of more power. And believe it or not, Trump himself is anti-American, vehemently so. And that will be hard for some people to see because Trump likes to use the American aesthetic to virtue signal that he is a patriot, when really he is just using his executive power for purely selfish reasons, to enrich himself and his friends and family, and to get what he thinks is revenge on those he has deemed his enemies. But he's against the Constitution and against the American values of freedom. How does the Trump administration define extremist? Well, it doesn't really matter, since they themselves are extremists, so their opinions will be skewed. Because an extremist has distorted views, a person with normal views will look extreme to them. How do they define anti-Christian or anti-American? Doesn't matter. Since it's all about power, they can construe you as either if they want to. If you were ever critical of Christianity, even as a Christian, critical of a particular denomination, or if you were ever critical of capitalism, even crony capitalism, or not just America, but even America's policies or America's past, then perhaps they can accuse you of encouraging violence. Now, you might say that mere disagreements about religion, economics, or America can't possibly be construed as encouraging violence, but consider what Trump has already called encouraging violence. Trump wants to send people who burn their own American flag, their own property, to prison for a year because he says such an act encourages violence, even though the Supreme Court ruled 36 years ago that it's protected free speech. You see, Trump's patriotism is really just hollow performative patriotism that ironically goes against actual American values and does far more harm than the mere burning of a piece of cloth. But what about anti-Christian? According to the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I, for one, believe that people should be able to freely and peacefully practice Christianity. I just don't believe the religion itself is true, and I try to convince others of that because I believe that religious thinking leads us exactly to where we are right now. Does that make me anti-Christian? Well, in a way, yes, but most certainly not in a way that advocates violence against Christians, nor the use of any sort of force against them for being Christian. And I'm actually pro-America, meaning that I want America to improve as a society, become more peaceful, prosperous, and facilitate upward mobility for the masses, which obligates me to not support Donald Trump's fascistic, hostile takeover in any way. But what they're trying to do is make the Trump name synonymous with America. Their goal is to make being anti-Trump considered synonymous with being anti-America. Then you can be considered the enemy, an outsider, not a real American. Once you're the enemy from within, as Trump said to the generals, you can be dehumanized. And once you're dehumanized, any matter of atrocity can be committed against you with a clean conscience. That dehumanization includes using the murder of Charlie Kirk to demonize those they deem on the side of the murderer. It doesn't matter how far removed you are from the murderer or his politics. You see, it's all about power. If you're against Trump, then you are the enemy, and you will inherently be considered as belonging to the side, not the man who killed Charlie Kirk. They want to collectivize the blame. They did this. They did that. They tried to assassinate Trump. They killed Charlie Kirk. That's how they present the rhetoric. And since you are a part of they, you essentially played a role in killing Charlie Kirk. That's the goal of the rhetoric. Guilt by association, whether you can legitimately be associated or not. Because once you can be deemed a violent radical, all kinds of extreme acts can be justified against you. The falsehood that you are somehow complicit will be used to intimidate you into silence. What we're witnessing right now is not just an escalation of violence, but also the use of that violence to justify an escalation of harmful labels and actions. You can be a humanist who desires nothing but peace and prosperity, like I do, yet be investigated as a terrorist nonetheless. That's your new label, terrorist. Because if you as a political enemy can be called terrorists, then you can also become part of the war on terror, which means that the full capabilities of the United States can be leveraged against you. Illegally, of course, but that doesn't matter to this new regime. This law and order regime does nothing but disregard law and order.
So, after carefully listening to the gentleman, here is my deep critical analysis. You see, to understand this narrative of misconception, mythology, and hypocrisy of the American government, it is good that we understand this. One must also peel back the narratives. We must deconstruct them and trace the connections between incidents such as the Congo bleeding minerals, the Rwanda's haunted hills, the Iraqi shared cities, the global reach of Henry Kissinger, and the long historical betrayal of black people who were promised equality but given surveillance, poverty, and state violence, right? That is what this critical analysis is going to cover. So, we need to understand also that the manufacturing of a global myth, how the West invented its own morality. Morality is something which is never subjective. Morality is always objective. But when the US government came and in collaboration with the Western governments, they built their own type and their own form of morality. One that would silence their conscience and one that would allow them fight their cognitive dissonance as they executed their selfish plans to the rest of the world. You see? We need to understand this. There was a beginning for the birth of the Western lie, and here it is. The foundational lie of Western powers was not merely that it was superior, but that its superiority gave it moral authority. The lie was necessary. Without it, colonialism would be recognized for what it was, armed robbery on a planetary scale. The West built three interlocking myths. The first myth is this: the West is the world's moral guardian. You see, they used this terminology, the world's moral guardian, to justify, first of all, colonialism. Second, missionary expansion. Third was modern foreign intervention. Fourth was NATO peacekeeping. Fifth was IMF structural adjustments. Sixth was wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. Western systems such as capitalism, democracy, Christianity are the default direction of human progress, used to portray non-Western. So they used these systems. Again, I repeat: capitalism, democracy, Christianity, which were the default direction for human progress, right? So these were used to portray non-Western society as first, backward; second, tribal; third, as failed states; and fourth, countries which were non-Western were in need of saving, right? The third myth was the suffering of black people is a secondary issue, a historical footnote, or an unfortunate byproduct of progress. This was the most violent myth of all, because it allowed slavery, it allowed segregation, it allowed colonialism, it allowed neo-colonialism and police violence also to continue under the banner of values. So America is an empire that pretends it is not an empire. America rose to global dominance not through moral superiority, but through genocide of indigenous nations, theft of land, enslavement of Africans, corporate-fueled wars, CIA-installed dictators, economic coercion disguised as aid, you know, yet it insists it is not an empire. But why does it insist that it is not? Because an empire can be resisted, but a protector cannot. The greatest achievement of US power is psychological, therefore. It convinced the world to ignore its crimes while amplifying those it opposes. This is ideological hegemony, the domination of worldview. You see, there's a man called Gramsci who warned about it. Fanon warned about it. Malcolm X screamed about it. But America marketed its story better than any other nation in history. Hollywood, the Pentagon, and Wall Street formed a triangle of narrative power. The West learned that if you control the story, you control the world, you know. You see, this did not just end in the global north. It extended down to the global south. You see, The global south was bleeding while the global north, the Americas, and the European countries were succeeding, right? So a good example is Congo. The wound the West keeps opening, right? Congo is the mirror that reflects the ugliest face of the West. From King Leopold genocide, where you find that 10 million Congolese were killed, to the modern extraction of coltan today, cobalt, gold, copper, and uranium. Congo has fueled Western industrial power for more than a century. Phones, laptops, electric cars, satellites all depend on Congo. Yet Congo remains poor, not by accident, but by design. Western lies about Congo are these. Congo is unstable because Africans cannot govern themselves, you know? This is what they say to lure those people asking questions. But in reality, the CIA assassinated a prominent leader in Congo by the name Patrice Lumumba. You see, he was Congo elected leader because he wanted independence from Western control. The West could not just see a country that they loot from go away in the hands of a man, just a mere man by the name Patrice Lumumba. So they organized on his assassination. Another lie that they say about Congo is the conflicts are tribal. You see, they are actually corporate wars engineered by Western mining interests. You see, divide and conquer. Once you bring the seed of doubt, you will also cause wars. And while they're busy fighting, you're busy looting, right? So it is a divide by conquering, and then you loot as they are busy fighting themselves, you know? The third is the West provides humanitarian aid. It provides aid after creating the conditions that require aid. It's like you create a problem for someone and then you solve the problem for them. And that now makes you a messiah, you know? You feel like you're a helper, you're a messiah, but you caused the problem. It is your responsibility to fix it. Fixing it, you're not doing anyone any favor. So we have more and more deeper truth. Congo is not just underdeveloped, it is intentionally underdeveloped, get it right, to keep global supply chains dependent on cheap African minerals. Every time an American taps a smartphone, Congo bleeds a little more. So anytime a phone is produced, anytime an electric device is out there on the market, someone somewhere is shedding blood and is crying in a country called DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. We have so many countries and we are using them as examples. Another example we have is Rwanda. You see, the West favorite myth and its quiet guilt. The 1994 genocide did not erupt spontaneously. It was a deadly outcome of colonial identity engineering, where Belgium created racial categories, the Hutu and the Tutsi, which after creating these tribes, you know, they hardened them through law, education, and administration. Yet, when the genocide came, Belgium, France, the US, and the UN allowed 1 million people to die in 100 days, you know. Afterward, they told another lie. We did not know. Documents prove they knew. They simply had no strategic interest in intervening. It was not in their favor because it would not bring them profit if they intervened and stopped the war, you know. The real Western crime in Rwanda is not just negligence, it is construction. The genocide was planted in the colonial era, watered by identity manipulation, fertilized by racial hierarchy, and harvested by geopolitical indifference, right? So they bring a seed of doubt among Africans, among the tribes. And then they say, you know, those people are trying to manipulate you. I think you should do something about them. See, this divide and conquer strategy is very, very efficient. Very, very efficient because it yields results. It yields so much negative results, you know. Another one we need to talk about is Iraq. Now Iraq is in the Middle East. The lie that cost 1 million lives. You see? Weapons of mass destruction is another name that was identified, or rather that was synonymous to Iraq back in the days. One of the greatest lies in modern history. You see? The US invaded Iraq not for democracy, not for security, but for this, for oil, for geopolitical dominance, for military contracts, and also for reconstruction profits, you know. The result was this: over 1 million deaths, destruction of ancient civilization centers, the rise of extremist groups, permanent instability in the region. And when no WMDs were found, you see, WMD refers to weapons of mass destruction. When they were not found, America simply moved on. No accountability, no reparations, no justice. They were finding a reason to eject the leader from the seat so that they could have access to their materials, right? You either give us or we take. That's very sad. Another character that I believe is worth mentioning, a character with whom has caused also more harm to the human race, a character from the US, even though he is now late, but we need to speak about him. He is the architect of modern chaos, and his name is Henry Kissinger. You see, Henry Kissinger was not a strategist. He was not a diplomat. He was not a peacemaker. He was an ideologue of violence, the intellectual executioner of millions. He believed that brown lives, black lives, non-Western lives were expendable materials for Western dominance. You see, his fingerprints are everywhere. In Cambodia, you see, he bombed and killed hundreds of thousands. In Vietnam, he prolonged the war. In Chile, he supported the Pinochet dictatorship. In East Timor, he greenlights Indonesia's invasion. In Bangladesh, he supports Pakistan during genocide, you know. In Congo, he is also accountable for the crippling of independent African leadership. Kissinger represented the soul of Western foreign policy, cold, calculating, deeply racist, and committed to power at any human cost. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for war. That tells you something, and it tells you everything about Western morality. I told you that their morality is highly subjective. And this is why, you know, this is why. Again, we can't speak all this, we can't tell all this story without speaking about or without speaking of the Black Americans. The betrayal of the Black people and the domestic empire. American lies to the Black people. At home, America crafted a second myth that racial progress was steady, linear, and benevolent. But the historical record shows emancipation replaced by Jim Crow, civil rights displaced by mass incarceration, voting rights replaced by voter suppression, equality replaced by economic apartheid, integration replaced by surveillance and policing. The lie is that America is constantly improving. The truth is that America is constantly adapting its systems of control, from shackles to chains, again to cages, from overseers to police, to militarized SWAT teams, from slave patrols to FBI and the Interpol to predictive policing algorithms. The techniques changed, the outcome did not. So we believe, and I understand that we must also deconstruct the unmasking architecture of Western power. You see? The West hides its violence behind euphemism, using soft words to cover up for violence and bad actions, you know. Intervention nowadays is a replacement for inversion. Development is another statement for exploitation. Peacekeeping means militarized policing. Humanitarian aid means geopolitical leverage. Partnership means dependency. Free market means corporate monopoly. The word is engineered to conceal harm. The West hides its racial hierarchy behind polite languages. You see? At-risk communities, underprivileged minorities, inner-city crime, and social vulnerability. These phrases sanitize the legacy of slavery, redlining, and economic exclusion. You see? To deconstruct the West is to expose the machinery behind the illusion, a system built on extraction, justified by narrative, maintained by violence, and sanctified by propaganda. You see? There is so much and so much that the US has done wrong against the human race. And it takes such a bold man to come and speak about those atrocities, you know. This is one of the individuals who lives in that country. So what he speaks with a certain level of authority and a certain level of truth, right? I believe that we should find more and more people to come up front and speak the truth as it is, yes. And if you have any value, if you have found any value, I mean, in this video, kindly subscribe, be sure to comment, share your thoughts, support me on Patreon. You can donate anything that your heart wills. I'll really, really appreciate. And see you in the next one. Remember, stay positive always. See you in the next one.